Right, hi guys, here we go. This is the poem London by William Blake. This is part of my 7 poems that I'm choosing to take into the exam with me for the Power and Conflict AQA anthology. You might be watching this because London is on another anthology that you're studying. Cool, that's fine. I'm not going to be talking about AQA specifically. This is just analysis of the poem, what I would choose to learn, what I would choose to revise, what quotes and techniques. So the overall principle here is that we want to learn 2 language, 2 structure, and 2 form techniques. A lot of people get confused between structure and form super quickly. Let me just break that down for you. By a form technique, what I mean is a technique that is unique to poetry. Mostly apart from anaphora, but it's mostly unique from poetry. I'm talking rhyme, rhythm, stanza length, so iambic pentameter, free verse, blank verse, volta, anaphora. In poetry, it's slightly different. If it was a structural technique in a piece of prose, it would be different, but let's not worry about that. So that's what I mean by form, and they are going to be on the screen in pink. So at the top, you can see my key, language in green, structure in blue, and form in pink. Let's get into it. So first of all, what are our key ideas in the poem London? Well, it is a poem mostly about suffering. Suffering of people who are living in London, who are under the oppression of the state. That might be the royals, and also the church is mentioned in this as well. It's what we would call like an anti-establishment poem, in that it's kind of railing against those who are in power, hence why it's in the Power and Conflict anthology. So the first stanza here, some people pick out the fact that the streets are chartered and the chartered Thames. Yes, that's repetition of the word. It's not overly interesting. I can't really fit it into suffering or really oppression. I've got better techniques for that, so I'm not going to worry about chartered. I'm going to start with the final line of stanza 1, and I'm going to consider that as one of my quotes that I'm going to learn. Marks of weakness, marks of woe. So the reason I'm interested in that is because we do have more of a prose version of anaphora, in that a pattern of words is repeated at the beginning of consecutive phrases. Marks of, marks of. So marks of weakness, marks of woe. And I love the alliteration of weakness and woe as well. Also makes it kind of easy to memorize. And it's a really good one, of course, because weakness and woe, we can fit really nicely into that idea of suffering. So that's probably my first technique, anaphora and repetition, alliteration, and I can zoom in as well and analyze those words, weakness and woe. So that's probably one of my top quotes that I would consider. Stanza 2. Actually, no, let's talk about the form, because actually we can see it really clearly in stanza 1, which is that it is written in iambic tetrameter. So don't get confused with iambic pentameter, which is 10 syllables in a line. This is 8. So I wander through each chartered street, 8, near where the chartered Thames does flow, 8, and mark in every face I meet, 8, marks of weakness, marks of woe. Marks of weakness, marks of woe. Marks of weakness, marks of woe. Slight pronunciation on weakness for it to fit into 8. So what I would say about this use of rhythm is that it's a very strong rhythm. And the way I kind of think about this sort of rhythm is that it feels quite bouncy. I wander through each chartered street near where the chartered Thames does flow. I'm marking every face I meet. It's bouncy, 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 because it's obviously of course got those even numbered stressed syllables of 2. So that's really nice for power, because it gives it this sort of like powerful drive across the line, and you can talk about the powerful rhythm and link it into the power of the state, the royal family, or the church or whatever it is, feels quite oppressive. It doesn't really massively deviate from that. It does at points, but really it doesn't massively deviate. It stays in that, so it's tightly controlled. Now add on top of that the rhyme: street and meet, flow and woe, which we would call an A-B rhyme scheme, in that it goes A-B, A-B, and that continues through the entire poem. And that's a sense of control, because you sort of can predict what the next word potentially is, because in that pattern, because it's going to have to rhyme with street, of which there are way fewer words. So it's very tightly controlled in its rhyme and rhythm, which is great to analyze. Now, going back to the bounciness that I call it of that rhythm, bum, 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 bum. I think what's really interesting about this poem is that it's almost got this nursery rhyme quality. Think of like twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, or whatever it is. I haven't sung that since I was like 4. So it's kind of got that very upbeat melody to it. Now think about how interesting it is that it's written in that slightly upbeat tone, yet it's dark. Like, the content of the poem itself is really dark. So there's this nice juxtaposition between the content, the suffering, and yet this kind of upbeat rhythm and rhyme. So it links into power and suffering, but it creates this sort of odd feeling of like juxtaposition between kind of like happiness, but then like really sad stuff. Stanza 2. I've picked out in pink in every, which in poetry is straight up anaphora. Because if you remember what I was saying about marks of weakness, marks of woe, that's a more traditional form of anaphora, because it's across the line. It's a repeated pattern of words at the beginning of consecutive phrases within a line. What's different with poetry, poetic anaphora, is that it goes line down to line, and you normally have 2 or 3 repeated patterns. So in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban. So what does it do, that anaphora? Well, it helps to emphasize. Like all repetition, it adds emphasis. So in every cry, suddenly almost like hyperbolizes how much suffering there is. In every infant's cry, in every voice, there's lots of kind of hyperbole to that, which obviously helps to emphasize the suffering. And I've added in as well, now we've got words like weakness, woe, and cry. This is all a semantic field of suffering, which we can then obviously use to talk about that key idea of suffering from the power. And that final line is one that I would definitely try and memorize as well. The mind forged manacles. Excellent metaphor there. Manacles meaning shackles or like handcuffs, heavy iron handcuffs weighing them down. And the fact that they're in the mind is all about control. The fact that this poet is trying to communicate how people are suffering through control and oppression. So that's absolutely one that I want to pick out, the mind forged manacles. And the anaphora is great for form. I've already got rhyme and rhythm. So do I need anaphora if my target is 2 language, 2 structure, 2 form? Maybe I'll learn 3. Or maybe I'll take out rhythm and put in anaphora. It depends on you. But I'm just picking out what I think are the top techniques to look out for. 3rd stanza. Blackening church, hapless soldier's sigh, runs in blood down palace walls are pretty good quotes if you're looking to analyze language. You've got the sibilance of hapless soldier's sigh, which helps to emphasize. Again, it's a pattern of repetition. So just all alliteration is repetition of a sound. So it helps to maybe emphasize often the final word in the pattern, which is sigh. Fits into our semantic field of suffering as well. The blackening church, blackening helps to symbolize black, meaning evil, darkness, fear. That fits in as well to our idea of suffering. And then lastly, the metaphor runs in blood down palace walls. 100% one of the lines you want to memorize, I think, in my opinion, because it helps to communicate the blame. We're putting blame on the royals, their palace. Our blood runs down their walls. Of course, metaphor, because it's not literally running down the walls. But it assigns that blame. William Blake is saying, you know, I blame the royals for causing all of this misery and suffering. Final stanza, let's see what we got. But most through midnight streets I hear. Let's talk about the first person. So it is written in first person. I wonder, I meet, I hear, I hear. There's a nice little bit of sensory imagery. The fact that it's about sound, which is interesting. First person makes us generally feel more connected to the emotions in the poem because we sort of feel more like we are in it ourselves as we read it, or it creates a very personal connection between us and the speaker. That's definitely one that I would analyze for structure along with semantic field, which I class as structure. How the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. Straight up, I love that oxymoron at the end. Marriage hearse. Hearse is the car or vehicle that will transport a body, someone who's died, to their burial. And yet marriage obviously completely counters that idea of death, which we feel is communicated in hearse. Marriage, joy, life, innocence, hearse, death, sadness, etc. So there's a nice juxtaposition, which we can call oxymoron because the words are being used together. And the idea behind this final stanza, in my interpretation, is that a harlot is a name for a prostitute or sex worker. The fact that it's a youthful harlot immediately makes us feel incredibly sympathetic that people are being placed into this situation, that they're having to do this for a living, sex work. And the fact that it blights with plagues the marriage hearse, in my interpretation, is the idea that the married men that are having affairs with these youthful girls are ending up with plagues. So like the transmission of like sexually transmitted diseases and stuff like that. And it plagues the marriage hearse. This is my interpretation. That's the way I interpret it. Other people might interpret it differently. It doesn't really matter. It's whatever works for you. And that's kind of the thing as well when it comes to analysing poetry. It's kind of all open to interpretation. There's sort of no definitive right answer. That's how I analyse it. So I really like the oxymoron marriage hearse because it creates a dissonance or a contrast, a clash in those words, which makes the reader feel slightly uncomfortable. So recapping then, what would I pick out? It's not a great one for structure, so I'm kind of only really left with two options. Semantic field of suffering and the fact that it's in first person. You've got plenty of choice for language. I'd probably choose marks of weakness, marks of woe, and runs in blood down palace walls. I might chuck in the mind forged manacles as well, because it's fairly easy to remember. And in terms of form, I really like the juxtaposition between the rhyme and the rhythm. So for me, I would choose as my two form techniques, iambic tetrameter and an A-B rhyme scheme. At the bottom, there is a little bit of information about a sort of summary of the poem. If you want to read that, maybe like just click pause, give it a read, make some notes on it. Don't forget to look over the context for it. I'm not going to go over context in these videos because it's quite easy to research, but I think helping to get an understanding of the poem itself is kind of better to hear. Whereas like context you can learn just from like, you know, Googling it or whatever. So I'm not going to run over context. But there you go, guys. That is the poem London. Pretty good one. I've put it into my collection of 7 poems because it links really nicely into power. So yeah, it's a bit of a winner, this one, I think. So hope you enjoyed that. Leave a like if you did, or whatever you need to do. Leave a comment if you want. I'm going to move on to the next poem, which I think is the prelude. So if you are following along with my 7 chosen poems that I've recommended you learn, definitely check out the next video, which is going to be the prelude, or find it in the channel. Thanks so much. See you in a bit.